Welcome to Yall Seeing the Scene, a new Break NG podcast series. This is not like the typical Break NG podcast. We're not going to be having guests too often, and this series does not revolve around the guests. This actually revolves around the scene. And I'm asking y'all, are y'all seeing the scene? Because the breaking scene changes every year. There's new top guys every couple weeks, it seems. There's a new meta of breaking. There's a new format introduced. There's a different style of jam being thrown. And you see it happening all over. You hear conversations happening behind closed doors in group chats. But I'm going to go ahead and be the one to bring it to the forefront right here on the Break NG channel. So, as you know, my name is Luis El Prado. You might be asking yourself, what qualifies him to be able to speak on this? Well, 4 things. 1, I'm an active competitive b-boy. I'm not going to jinx myself, but I think I do pretty well at regional competitions all around the United States. 2, I'm in 2 different crews, both of which are very active. 3, I'm an event promoter, organizer, and they're pretty good, successful events, I would say. And then 4, I'm in what a lot of people would call like in the know for the scene in a lot of ways. So I'm going to bring it to the audience, and hopefully everybody can have some sort of healthy discussion in regards to this topic. And you might be wondering, what is the first topic? What are we going to be kicking off with? Well, I put it up as a poll on the Break NG Instagram, and the results were in, and people want to talk about breaking crews in 2025. Now, this is a loaded topic because breaking crews in 2025 look very different than they did 10 years ago, than they did 20 years ago, than they did 30 years ago. And for context, I started breaking in 2009. I had my first crew in 2011. That kind of died out. I hopped between little groups here and there. And eventually I made my way to Full Force in 2021. And now I'm in Full Force and Astro Club, which is a brand new crew, I would say. And I've kind of seen it all. I've seen all different types of crews. So for those at home that might be part of the scene and might be wondering, like, what are the different types of crews? Well, you came to the right place. When you talk about breaking crews, there are 3 different buckets you can exist in. Bucket 1, the legacy crew. Full Force falls under the legacy crew label. And what is a legacy crew? Let's define it. A legacy crew is a crew that has been around for decades, really long time. Typically, it has very well-known members. For example, Full Force has Ronnie. Full Force has Kid Rainin. You know, people that, in my opinion, have definitely done their part in the scene and have carried a name for themselves for decades. They are like the big names, and then it kind of starts like rolling down depending on the generation. That's another thing. If you're talking about breaking crews, legacy crews have generations. Typically, legacy crews are like big names that recruit new talent over time, and they start building up a roster so that they can stay relevant and active without necessarily needing the original members to do all of that grinding, you know, because people get older. You shouldn't be expecting a 45-year-old to still be breaking at a high competitive level in 2025 if they were highly competitive 20 years ago, you know? It's rare. I'm not saying it's not possible, but it's rare. So typically, yes, legacy crews are 3 things. 1, they've been around for decades. They have multiple generations. 2, they're typically a big name, popular crew. For example, we have Rock Force, you have Full Force, you have Renegade Rockers. Floor Gangs, I think, is a legacy crew. You've got like Floor Masters is another legacy crew. You know, Massive Monkeys. These are all big names that people recognize just upon name recognition, right? So that's bucket 1, legacy crews. Bucket 2, I would call them regional crews. And to be a regional crew, in my opinion, you have to put in the work. You have to have been active, consistently showing up, and being a mainstay name in brackets within your region and honestly throughout other regions as well. And if you want some examples of crews like that, I would say Elephant Graveyard is in there. I would say Stray Path is in there. I would say X Fiends is in there. You know, you're also looking at other crews such as New Birth is in there. You know, these are typically crews with maybe not having had members that are super recognizable that were around 20 years ago that can transcend generations, but names that are very recognizable today. You know, if you see these names in the bracket, you typically know like, hey, I got to look out for these guys. And then you have Bucket 3. Bucket 3, in my opinion, is where the majority of people fall in that are either just starting breaking or not able to define themselves as being one of the other two buckets. In Bucket 3, you have friendship groups or local crews. So these are the crews that are still trying to find their footing, still trying to find their identity. And that's another key essential part of Bucket 2. If you're a regional crew, you typically have an identity. Like people know what you bring to the table and what is your signature flair, right? In Bucket 3, you haven't found that yet. You're typically with a group of friends, typically all starting out, maybe not passing prelims, maybe losing in top 16, maybe having a tough time identifying like what makes your crew stand out. And that's where I started out. I had a crew named Knick-Knack Crew. The name wasn't great. And also as talents, as like 5 individual members that we didn't necessarily have like a distinct style. Like we were all learning, we were passing prelims, maybe top 16, losing in top 8. And that was kind of like our ceiling for a long time. That's kind of where I would put a lot of crews right now. And depending on your work ethic, you can jump buckets. So for example, if you start off with a group of friends and y'all stay really consistent and you start showing out outside of your city and also within your city, you have to win within your city to start leaving and trying to win elsewhere, right? If you start putting in that work, you start getting identified as a regional crew. And once you're doing the regional crew stuff, if you do it for long enough and you start showing results, you start showing a following and you have a distinct style that people really appreciate, you start making your way to a legacy crew. I think in my opinion right now, legacy crews are defined by the generations that, you know, are keeping them alive. But in my opinion, there's also crews that have existed back then that didn't exactly recruit, but they are legacy crews because of the legacy they left behind, right? And for example, one of those crews are like Lions of Zion. Lions of Zion aren't really super active anymore, you know, but they had their run and they had a distinct style and people loved them for it. And we remember them for that reason. That is their legacy. They are a legacy crew. So that was a mouthful. Let's talk about what a successful crew looks like in 2025. One of the names that I always like to refer back to, they've been on the Break NG podcast. They're a collective of breakers that, in my opinion, really showcase what breaking is supposed to look like in 2025. I don't want to say supposed to, actually. They showcase what breaking is in 2025. I think people can stray from that formula, you know, but ultimately, I'm talking about Elephant Graveyard. Elephant Graveyard is a success story in many ways because they were all part of smaller crews, I think save for Levix, and they were all friends. They came together. They decided to become a collective. See, this is Bucket 3. And they started slowly putting in that rep locally. They started showing up in other states. They started making finals, winning in other states, you know, really putting that name out there. They started dressing in a very distinct way. The Arc'teryx beanies, you know, it almost looks like they're hikers, but they're choosing to display that aesthetic while also giving you a not so linear form of breaking. Like hiking is pretty linear, you know, you're finding a different path, but you're ultimately scaling up to the top. They're dressing like hikers, but they're giving you angles, they're giving you different flows, they're giving you different ideas that you typically don't see from the common breaker nowadays. And they're essentially setting the meta in California, or at the very least regionally. And I think that's really cool because we had been missing a crew like that for a while. We had been running rampant with legacy crews, and legacy crews will always remain. You know, I will be on Full Force, and in maybe 10 years time, I won't be breaking anymore, but I guarantee you there will be at least another 2 generations of Full Force that will keep it going, you know? I'm not sure if Elephant Graveyard has that same vision, but that's what's good now. What's hot now, Elephant Graveyard. I think, in my opinion, also like 808 Breakers. I don't know if they're necessarily legacy crew right now because they do have a younger generation, but the older gen is still really active. And this crew just oozes with style, with essence. You know, they break in a specific way. They seem to live life in a specific way as well. And they really showcase their city, where they come from. And it seems like they have a sense of integrity within the crew that feels to me like we grow together, we win together, we lose together, we do it all together, you know? And it's rare nowadays in 2025. 10 years ago, as I mentioned at the intro, crews did look a lot different. Many people went the super crew route. And this is when like the best dudes in every city decided to join under a collective. Not every city. In every city, maybe. I'm just speaking for San Diego and even like LA. There would be at least 1 or 2 or 3 crews that would be like the best people locally that had already been part of different crews that just came together under a collective name and started winning things because they could. They were just all very good. And if a bunch of very good people team up together, they can typically wipe a bracket, win some money, and call it a day. But they weren't moving together. You know what I'm saying? They weren't giving you the feeling that these people hang out on the weekends often, or that these people know each other on a deeper level than just like movement wise. And obviously I'm making a generalization. I don't know if that's true or not from all these super crews, but it was a trend definitely in like the 2010s. And on top of that, I think in the 2010s, you also saw legacy crews really like beating down on like most brackets. and this is great. This is great because you have to do that to continue keeping the title of a legacy crew alive, right? But you know, for a long time, it wasn't necessarily very easy to grow in the scene as a crew because there was a lot of legacy crews entering and winning. And you would get wiped out in top 16 because you had Full Force in the first battle, or you had California in the first battle, or you had Renegades in the first battle, right? Havakoro. It's one of those things where the meta now has been like stabilized a bit because people can make a name for themselves today because legacy crews are a little less likely to show up at a lot of these events. The final point that I want to make about breaking crews in 2025 is the etiquette. I think crew etiquette is so core to the idea of a breaking crew. This is like how you operate when you're not on the floor. This is how you choose to dress. This is how you choose to get your brand across. And that last one is so essential because Instagram is such a driving force for what we perceive about other crews. How you show up on Instagram actually has a really big impact. If you're a crew, but you never post any sort of like crew content or any sort of like highlight clips, people will honestly not really think twice about you. Like they'll know like, hey, you exist and I'll see you in the bracket. But between this jam and the next jam, you're not sharing anything. So why should we care about you when you're not at the jam, you know? And I think in this day and age, to be a successful, good crew, you got to throw events. You gotta move the part, right? Like you gotta have a distinct style. You gotta have a distinct brand. Logos are a thing. Even having a sense of like media presence, I think is also another thing. Like who you collaborate with, who you choose to align yourself with. All of that is so essential to the way a crew can come across and how a crew succeeds. And who's to say that won't look different in the future, right? And in my opinion, the last point I want to make about crew etiquette is this. When you are a crew, you're supposed to essentially be one unit, not 4 or 5 individual pieces moving, you know, on their own and then trying to make everybody believe that they're a unit. This isn't law, you know, I'm not the Breaking Bible or anything, but if you want to succeed as a crew in 2025, you have to be intentional. And if you have no intentions on what you want your crew to do, why do you exist as a crew? Why not just be a friend group? Why not just be a collective? Why not just be a temporary team up, right? It's interesting, I'm not sure what it was like in the 90s. I'm not sure what it was like in the early 2000s, but I do know this. Hopefully the meta continues changing and breaking continues to thrive in the real part of the scene, not the Red Bulls, not the, high budget, high production value, high prize jams. Like, the crews are born and bred from the community events, the grassroots efforts, and that's the only way you're going to make your name nowadays, unless you choose to go the solo route. But that's a different episode for a different conversation for a different time. So I want to know, what are your takes on crews in 2025? Do you agree with what I said? Do you have a different opinion? Did I miss something? The comment section is open. I can't wait to hear what you say. Until next time, are y'all seeing the scene? This is Alprod, out.